Okay, so today we're going to do class over a video today. So thanks for joining in and taking the time to watch this. I'm sorry we couldn't do a live class, but hopefully you enjoy doing this from a different comfortable environment. And then I will see you guys the following week. I hope you had a good midterm break and you had a time to look over the reading for today. We are going to finish up where we were talking with our life cycle in adolescence. We're going to finish that and then jump right over to older adults. And what you're going to see from me today is going through the PowerPoint slides like I normally do. So try and take some notes as you go. The notes are available on Moodle. You can print out like you always do. And there was no prep sheet for today, like I mentioned, but there will be a participation assignment for you to do that you can just email me, and so you can get participation points for today. So if you have any questions about any follow-ups with the presentation today, as always, let me know via email, and I will get back with you. Hopefully everybody doesn't have any problems with this today, and it goes nice and smooth. Bear with me if I'm jumping around and if any errors happen since I don't video myself all the time, but you guys know me and we'll get through this. Good. Okay, so we're going to jump right into adolescence. We've covered pregnancy, infancy. We went through all the stages of childhood. Last talked about, as you remember, the school-age child, and then we jumped over and talked a little bit about the obesity problem in America. We're going to touch a little bit more on that today as well. Well, let's get right into adolescence. When we were talking about infants, we talked about how that is the fastest rate of growth that, in a child will go through. Well, adolescence is the second fastest time. So it's extremely important that nutrition is very beneficial during the time of adolescence. And by this time, a lot of those eating habits are set. We talked about how at 5 years old, a lot of the attitudes are set. And you can imagine by adolescence, in your own experiences, you've already picked up a lot of habits from your family, your friends. A lot of that has influenced you. So as you can see with the overview, as I mentioned, how fast the rate of growth is, and then the nutritional needs in an overview. There's more calories that are needed as our bodies are getting bigger. We're in that super fast rate of anabolism. Metabolism is higher still. All through the childhood, metabolism is going fast. And so we have the need for increased calories, protein, for all that building in our body with all that growth, the maintenance. Calcium is super important, iron and zinc. You've seen iron and zinc mentioned a couple other times with childhood. It's super important. And they really increase at that onset of puberty, and those growth spurts are a truly real thing. And growth spurts, you can see a child actually grow faster some course of a year and then slow down and kind of grow faster again. The growth spurts are truly real. So let's talk about nutritional needs just in general. Now, when I say they need more increased calories, I mean good nutritional calories, not those empty calories that we talk about a lot, that they're nutritionally dense would be the ideal way to get the calories. So they are really worthwhile. And usually the average female, 2,000 or a little more. It depends on the person, their activity. And then males are usually at least 2,500 calories or so. Height and activity would be considered in there as well. Increased calcium needs. Look at that, 40% of bone mass is accumulated during this time. And that's really happening during those growth spurts. So it's very important to get that calcium, and that is obtained from diet. And so a lot of problems will happen when the calcium intake is low with that not good nutrition. It's happened to be more of a problem with females, that only 65% of female in adolescent years actually get the calcium that they need. So in an educational nutrition manner, calcium for adolescent females is very, very important. as well as iron seems to be low, especially for adolescent females. And a lot we can have long-term complications if those minerals are deficient. You're just setting your body up for not good long-term health. And we've talked about osteoporosis when we talked about and mineral, the calcium being low, or even anemia. And the anemia is related to the iron. Hopefully that's making sense to you by now. And we really need better choices of food. They're surveying, I've showed you examples of surveys that they collect, and most adolescents are not receiving the recommended servings of my plate. And you've seen that consistently since I started talking about, I think, school-age children, preschool, school-age adolescents. We really need to get focused good on the my plate groups. So some key nutritional concerns are that the eating habits are often inadequate in meeting the recommended nutritional intake, obviously there. So that is a huge concern. And look on the other, not only the nutrition not adequate, now even the diets generally exceed the recommendations for total fat. Here's our saturated fat, cholesterol. Cholesterol is, coming from the animal products. Sodium, we've talked about that, and of course some examples of sugar, especially our empty calories like pop is going to be the number one thing on the list that are consuming, and it's just really empty calories. And then if you look down your prep sheet about adolescents, you might have saw some other concerns like snacking patterns, a lot of snacking, more than our body needs. Adolescents going through fads of dieting, fad diets are extremely a problem with adolescents as they're in the psychological stage of learning their identity, and they can get overwhelmed with dieting and influencing of peer pressure. So eating disorders such as bulimia and anorexia. When you continue on in your nursing pathway and you get to pediatrics, you'll hear something like that come out. And then one of the things even mentioned in the book was adolescent pregnancy, and that puts someone at extremely difficult to get nutrition. We've learned about pregnancy, how much nutrition, and then can you imagine an adolescent female that's pregnant? It's like 2 times worse in that case to get adequate nutrition. So some other concerns I just thought I'd mention on there. And so that kind of wraps up the key points I want you to get out of adolescence. I want to talk a few more things about the overweight children and adolescents. Last time we met, I showed you some graphs, I showed you some stats, how in the last 10 years things haven't improved too much at all. We went through how culture can be affected, such as when we looked at Hispanics and blacks being higher prevalence of obesity rather than such as like white and Asian. So having some factors in there, and there's a multitude of other factors as well. And we talked about, I had a question about what it puts children at risk for. It's things like diabetes, high blood pressure, bone and joint problems, that just for the fact of having diets that exceed nutritional requirements. We're doing too much, not physically moving enough. And that's why I have this next slide, and I want to show you this website. I told you how Michelle Obama has made a lot of changes. I talked about the national lunch programs, and she is really focused on getting children up and moving as a battle to fight the obesity problem going on. Since we talked about, there hasn't been a whole lot of change in the last 10 years. So I want to show you this website. You can explore it more on your own if you'd like. And it's really user-friendly, especially for kids. You can see there's some little clips with Michelle Obama. There were some videos on here. There's some bloggings. Here's our president exercising. Some eating healthy little tidbits are on here too. You can see there's even things like healthy schools, families, gardening guide, teaching children even gardening and growing their own food has been shown to, encourage them to eat a little better. And to look at that little plant a garden, learn more, you can check that out. And get active, physical activity. It just talks about getting more active families, active schools, communities. Let's move. And little action. I gave you that handout which shows some tips for kids, and this is just, more of an online format for parents and children that they can look through. So you can hit here if you're a kid, if you're coming from school. If you go on to a healthcare position where you're doing a lot of education or even, collaborating with schools, this could be a good resource to use. Or educating parents, because health promotion and, preventing long-term problems is going to really make an impact. And we'll discuss that when we talk about older adult nutrition in a little bit. Okay, let me get back over to my slide here. So a few things to mention for our overweight children and adolescents that I wanted to go over. I saw a lot of good resources from the Center of Disease Control, and that's where I got those graphs before with the statistics. And you can remember the Center of Disease Control, that CDC, are the ones that also really push the use of growth charts in the office, and I showed you an example of one of those. We can see now that we're having the problem with overweight children and adolescents, pediatricians are treating diseases now. And this is something we haven't seen in the past. If you look probably 20 years ago, if you remember that chart, 20 years ago, the things we were starting to get higher, but nothing like it is quite now. They weren't seeing hypertension, that's high blood pressure with kids. Kids that have high blood cholesterol, and that's coming from a lot of use of higher fat intake, higher saturated fat, more animal products. You could attribute it to more fast food intake, eating out rather than at home. We talked about that kind of stuff. We're even seeing a type of diabetes now with our kids. And it actually is the type of diabetes that more older people were getting. It's not the type that they were born with. There's two types of diabetes. And the first type 1 was always called juvenile because they were born with a problem. They couldn't produce insulin from their pancreas. And the type 2 was the type that more older adults would get because of food and lifestyle choices. But now, the type of diabetes that more older people were getting because of lifestyle choices and aging, now our kids are getting it. So having children with diabetes is pretty awful because of all the long-term effects of diabetes. We'll talk about that in a few weeks when we have a whole day focused on nutrition for diabetes, and you'll get exposed to that a lot more, and you'll be reminded of just, how nutrition really plays a role in that. But anyway, and now it looks like if you look at the contributing factors, I talked about already that they vary. We talked about culture, we talked about food environment, home, fast food, genetics, the nutrigenomics that we talked about week 1, I think, way back in nutrigenomics, just focusing on people's genetics, how it's different. The sedentary lifestyle. We had the class on energy imbalance, and we talked more on why people aren't moving as much. We had a whole little discussion about that. The internal cues of hunger and satiety are extinguished, feeling full. We're eating with our appetite rather than true hunger, and a lack of recognition of problem by adults. And here we can think about parental education and doing that as well in here. Hold on just a moment. Sorry, I wanted to make sure I was still recording. Okay, so some things we can do for that, because we want to talk about prevention strategies, are those yearly, it says here BMIs, what that is basic, the body mass index. That is where they take your age and your weight and they come up with a number. And that's really about the same thing we were talking about with those growth charts, because we can key in on, I pointed out those lines, the lines at the top. If we have children that are getting higher than, if they're getting 75 percentile and higher. They weigh more than 75% of, a 5-year-old's weigh or something like that. And we see trends like that. And I talked about how it would be a good time for the pediatrician to talk with the family about that and maybe some nutritional counseling be thrown in there. Because really those healthy lifestyle habits, better physical activity can really lower the risk of becoming obese and developing the related diseases I already mentioned. So encourage healthy diets. Yeah, we even mentioned a few of those things. Fruit and vegetable intake. How many times have you heard me mention that? And how many times, when you look at that My Plate? Well, the first things we talked about in this class and how the half of the plate, fruits and vegetables, means even something as simple as that can overall help that a lot. Promoting physical activity. I showed you a little link on that. Even limiting screen time to 2 hours a day or even less. I mean, that's pretty generous, I think. Really depends on what the child's used to, but many children are used to coming home from school and spending a lot of time in front of the TV or video games. A lot more of that stuff now than there ever has been in the past. So just a lot of just several ideas of what we can do for prevention. But I really want you to remember that the use of growth charts again and how important physical activity is overall for these kids. Now, if you have any questions about, as we wrapped up, anything with the Life Cycle Part 1 discussion, please let me know. I'm glad I could wrap that up today and talk you through that kind of stuff. And next we are going to the Lifestyle Part 2. We're going to talk about our older adult, which is definitely more of my expertise because I see more experience with that. When we talk about who's in the hospital, who's needing acute chronic care, it's mainly that mature adult. So I have much more experience with that I can share with you as we talk through this today, the rest of our time. And I really want to get your attention and say, why is learning about older adult nutrition important? Well, the big thing is that our demographic changes are create a really urgent need for you to understand why nutrition is important. The growth in the number and proportion of older adults is never been as high as it is right now. And by 2030, which is right around the corner, older adults are going to account for 20% of the US population. They represent about 13% right now. So if you can imagine, we're at 13% of our population is older adult, and by 2030, 20% of our population is an older adult focus. A few things go into this. People are living with chronic conditions longer. A lot of these people were our baby boomers, where we just have a condensed amount of people that age right now. And this is again why the need for nursing and healthcare is so important, because our patients are going to be there. There's definitely job security in healthcare right now because there's going to be more and more older adults. So the demographic changes create that urgent need. Next, the chronic conditions present a strong economic incentive for action. During the past century, a major shift occurred in the leading causes of death for all age groups, including older adults. It used to be more infectious disease, acute illnesses, but hey, now it's chronic diseases. What's an example of a chronic disease? Kidney failure, diabetes, high blood pressure, congestive heart failure. Those are some really important examples of a chronic disease, and there's by far many, many more that you're going to learn if you continue on in the nursing program. There's a lot of interesting stuff there. But more than a quarter of all of our Americans have multiple chronic conditions, and the treatment for this population accounts for 66% of the country's healthcare budget right now. So economically, we're spending a lot of money on care for our older adults right now. So there is an incentive of why we can get good nutritional care and maybe make some changes with this. Now here's a little chart. You know how I like charts so much, but you can see this roughly is showing how the amount of people 65 years and up are going dramatically higher. You can see, look back in 1900. this range is super low. The older adults weren't living. This was people that lasted more than 65 years old. The average lifespan was just much, much lower. And now we have more people in the population and more people living. We're about right here. And look at the trends. They are just set to go so, so high. And just an example about how we are going up, up, up with our older adults. Okay, so let's talk about some specific nutritional needs for our older adult. Now, energy. Think about how we talked about that metabolism, the resting energy expenditure. You know that as REE by now. How the energy needs decrease about 5% per decade. So, and of course, this varies within elderly population, but in general, about 5% less need for calories, for energy per decade. So it's quite a bit lower. I have a slide coming up in just a couple to show you a little example of that. And just to step back a minute and talk nursing for a moment, I like to do that. As you go on in your nursing, you're going to learn specific nursing assessments for a person, for an older adult. And with assessments, you're going to include a dietary profile, like the type of things you're eating, what's going on, what are your medications, how active are you, what are your social, cultural practices, mental status, financial circumstances, access to food, access to mobility devices. There is a lot of assessment that we go into our patients and our person. We're looking at them individually, but the things I'm going to share with you are really just some general concepts. So the big thing is that the energy needs decreases, and that's mainly for the reason of lower muscle mass in the body. Their metabolism is just slowing down. Okay, just briefly talk about carbs and fiber. And you can see that the RDA of carbs is the same for younger adults. Not any changes right there. You need to learn it all. And overall, the fiber drops a little bit. It's still important, but your numbers are a little bit less. But you even know from doing that fast food discovery and even that personal diet analysis coming up, you're really going to see that the USDA, as they collected surveys of how low our intake of fiber is in the nation, I bet you'll be surprised that your intake of fiber is pretty low too. So although this recommended numbers of fiber are here, the actual numbers that they're intaking is quite lower than this. So it is important that you have the adequate amount of fiber every day that's recommended. Still talking about energy, let's talk about fats and protein now. Now, fats, look at this, a number you're familiar with as well, 20 to 35%. And I put on here that they might want to decrease the fat in diet for comfort. And if you're thinking, what does that mean right now? What am I talking about? I'm talking about how fat absorption is delayed in older people. In their digestive process, it's actually slowed. So they might have a longer feeling of fullness in their body, which may be uncomfortable for them. So that's why I put for comfort. Now for protein, a really good protein intake can enhance muscle and reduce the progressive loss of muscle mass. Because that's what's happening as people are aging, they're losing muscle mass. So that's why their energy needs and metabolism are slowing because of that muscle mass are lower. And an increase of protein, or at least the maintenance, may enhance that muscle protein anabolism and reduce the progressive loss of muscle mass that really accompanies aging. You know, what I have a little point on here because I really want to emphasize, and this may sound familiar because I've talked on it a little bit before, but nursing home residents are at particular risk to protein kilocalorie malnutrition. So here's an example of a negative nitrogen balance where that protein is low. And marasmus is the term that I kind of talked about this before. They get in the nursing home, their energy is lower, their mobility isn't as high, they're not having the protein, and they get into this protein kilocalorie malnutrition. And there's a lot of studies and data to really back this up, how these nursing home residents are really frankly malnourished. So There's been a lot of interventions on that, but I believe nursing homes still have quite a ways to go on that. And if you ever find yourself in a nursing home one day and that's your area that you love and you want to start there, then really be an advocate for those patients and make sure they get all that nutrition that they can get. Or else it's a slippery slope. If they're not getting that good protein, then one of those functions of protein was what? Immunity, right? So if we don't have a good immune system, these elderly patients aren't going to be able to protect themselves from a disease process. Getting the flu easier, catching pneumonia really easy. So it can be a slippery slope. Key nutrition is so important. Let's go. Oh, here's what I was talking about before. I should have had this on one slide previous probably. But I like this because you can just see the trends in calories. Okay, so this is just focused on calorie intake and it's based on age. And of course, there's other factors that may play a role, but this is just general. Now we have female and male, and we have an example of sedentary lifestyle, moderately active or active, and just look at those age trends. I mean, if you have a sedentary female, right about now we might need 2,000 calories, but when we get older than 51, we're down to 1,600. And the same for male. We got our height there. You see the peak around adolescence, and then it just slowly goes down there. And why this is important is as you grow older, if you continue eating the same types and amounts of food, but don't become any more active, you're probably going to gain weight. And that's because your metabolism slows with age. Okay? Your body uses less energy, and that means that it needs less food to make energy it needs. The energy your body gets from the nutrients in the food you need is, of course, the calories. So that's why I showed you that graph. So just some tips about exercise with the older adult. How always when I'm doing any teaching in the hospital about promoting activity, it's always good to check with their healthcare provider before starting a routine. If it's someone with really weak bones, maybe high risk for falls, or maybe they have a respiratory condition, maybe they were a chronic smoker and they have emphysema now, their activity might be a little limited because you don't want them to get extremely short of breath when they're walking around, 3 times around the block. So it's really going to be individual. So it's always a good idea to check with the healthcare provider before starting a routine at all. I think it's recommended the minimum of 30 minutes a day of moderate activity. And what that's going to do, and you can see, I like to talk on that healthy people objectives. I have another one of those for you. It says that to increase the proportion of older adults with reduced physical or cognitive function who engage in light, moderate, or vigorous leisure time physical activities. Our goal here, that objective, same as goal, our goal is to increase these adults, especially the ones with reduced physical or cognitive. When I say cognitive, I mean mental function. So maybe an example, dementia. Those people tend to get neglected. They don't seem to get the amount of energy that they should. So really focusing on those people and getting them up and moving a little more. Because getting more exercise is going to help the person stay independent longer. And if you have any experience talking to grandparents or older adults, you'll know that the independence means a lot. They're at the stage psychologically of integrity. They want to keep independence. They want to be happy with their life. They're meeting that kind of psychological stage. And when you get into psychology lifespan development, you'll really learn all those stages really well. You've seen them in the book with from infant to older adult. Everyone goes through psychological stages, and an older adult tends to be the integrity stage. So keeping independence is really important. Keeping active helps their balance, helps their strength, and ultimately that's really going to reduce the risk of falls too. We have these older adults and their calcium levels are low and they get sick, they get weak, their bones get frail, especially women. We learned about that with the osteoporosis. A lot of people are suffering falls. A lot of fractures are occurring more than ever. In the hospital, goals have been implemented to decrease falls in the hospital. And keeping people strong will keep their risk for falls down. I mean, literally people just falling over and breaking their hip and their legs, and it can really decrease their their lifestyle pretty quick. And of course, it can also reduce depression. I thought that was really nice to mention because our older people suffer with depression pretty commonly. And in a few slides, I'll actually talk about the anorexia of aging, and depression plays an impact in that. But we've talked about exercise and the endorphins and, raising our mood. That's the same as with an older adult. It's the same. It can be more important though. We need them to be healthy. So let's go on. What's next? Let's talk vitamins and minerals. What are some important things? I tried to pick out a few key ones to focus on. Vitamin D, I don't even think I need to explain vitamin D anymore. You know we need that so calcium can be used well. And calcium is important to maintain bone strength at this age because as you get older, everything wears, everything's slowing down, everything's not functioning as well, and even bone regrowth is slowing down. So these people tend to, get weak bones because of that. So calcium and vitamin D are very, very important. Now to touch on a little bit about a vitamin B1 that we learned, one of our water-soluble vitamins when we talked about the B categories is vitamin B6. It has a lot of enzyme functions in the body, especially with protein metabolism. We already talked about how important protein is with the older adult, so this vitamin is going to help protein be used well in the body. So overall, you can get that from, we've talked about how it's fortified in cereals, in whole grains. Those are some really good examples of sources of that. Vitamin B12, and simply vitamin B12, my mom's even on this one. People over the age of 50 start to have trouble absorbing their vitamin B12 found naturally in, most animal foods. We've associated with vitamin B12 with people that are like vegans and don't have animal products, how they have trouble getting that. So you can get vitamin B12 well with animal products, fortified cereals, and if it's recommended by a doctor, might have to get this through a supplement too. And vitamin B12 is something that we can check with a lab draw as well. So if patients are having any symptoms of low vitamin B12, we can actually check that with a lab draw and treat with nutritional changes or even supplements as needed. I already mentioned about calcium and sodium. Look at that. Everything else is we need to make sure we're maintaining or increasing. And I will say again, sodium, not only are we exceeding our sodium recommendations, what we're doing right now, but that continues the trend through older adults too. And we really need them to focus on reducing their sodium. It actually goes to about 1,500 milligrams every day. That's about 2/3 teaspoon of salt. And you know how much sodium is added to those processed foods and table salt in general, fast food products, you know that very well. And we need salt, but it's just getting way too high. We've talked about how salt intake too much is going to raise your blood pressure, and with someone like an older adult, the higher blood pressure is going to put them at risk for heart disease, stroke, kidney problems, etc. So really keeping that at the proper 1,500 milligram a day intake is really, really important. Now, water tends to be really important with older adults. If you remember back, if you were listening when I shared an example about how nursing homes, they started a routine of bringing water carts around because studies were showing that people in nursing homes, not only are they having trouble with malnourishment, with low protein levels, they're not getting the fluids like they should. And a big reason for that is with aging, they have a decreased sense of thirst. So in the brain, signaling your body to be thirsty, like we have naturally, we talked about, there's actually signals decrease in their body. So they don't nearly have the response like we do to drink when we're dehydrated and we need fluid. So you do have to be especially cognizant of it. And I'm going to show you a little video that I found, and I sure hope it works on here. I tested it out, and I think it will. Let me bring it up just a moment. Okay, this is actually from a website on the National Institute of Aging. There is so many resources for our older adults too. So as older adults are getting able to use the computer, some of them do, some of your grandparents may use the computer, and that's great because there is a lot of resources on here as well. You know, being more in charge of their health is really awesome right now as people are getting more in charge of their own health. But here is a little example of a video of water as you get older. You know how I like videos. It's just a short 4-minute one. Hopefully it works.
Today, there are lots of choices when it comes to drinking beverages. But what should you drink as you get older? For Richard, who is 64, it's water.
Water is basically the only thing I drink. Um, I don't know, every now and then I'll drink juice, um, but usually I don't even have juice in the house. So water is virtually all I drink.
Gloria, who is 79, also drinks a lot of water.
I try to drink water during the day. I always have water with my meals. If I have something else with it, like milk or iced tea or something, I'll try to have some water there too, and that makes me drink it.
It's important for older adults to consume plenty of liquids, especially water. You need to replace fluids you lose every day.
Well, water is very important because it contributes to regularity. It's necessary for all the reactions in the body. We know that thirst regulation is sometimes impaired with aging, so don't wait until you get thirsty to drink water. Make it a part of your day and drink it every day.
Other good beverage choices are unsweetened tea, low-fat or fat-free milk, and 100% fruit juice, although you should get most of your fruit from whole fruit and not fruit juices.
Fruit juices can be good as long as they're not overdone, and that we recognize them as a part of our serving of every day. We should actually encourage fresh fruit over fruit juices.
You can actually increase your intake of water by eating fresh fruits and vegetables, which have a high moisture content. To help control your calorie intake, try to limit beverages like soft drinks and sports drinks that are high in added sugars.
Beverages like sodas and sweetened sports drinks really need to be limited. They're a source of empty calories and work against our goal of increasing nutrient density.
Likewise, alcoholic beverages give you calories, but few nutrients. If you drink alcohol, limit the amount to 1 drink daily for women and 2 drinks daily for men. Water is something that many people know they should drink, but they just forget to do it. Gloria has found a way that works for her.
I kind of look at it as the medicine I take. So when I get up in the morning, I'm supposed to have certain medicines before meals, and I will sit in the living room and think about the day and sip until I get that 8 ounces in me, however long it takes.
You should make sure that you get enough water, but don't overdo it.
It can be overdone, and so there are cases where people drink so much water that they have some problems with electrolyte balance, and also it can contribute to having to go to the bathroom a lot during the night. So you may want to limit your fluid intake towards the end of the day.
I try to drink water during the day, and I'll take it down to the beach or something. So oftentimes I'm either so busy reading or falling asleep, or people watching water, but I try.
So, what's best to drink as you get older?
Water is always a safe choice and one of the best choices for adults of all ages. We recommend that adults get at least 6 glasses of water every day, and they may need even more if they're in situations where it's very hot or they're losing a lot of water via sweating.
Okay, so hopefully you heard a lot of good reminders back on even our little talk on water we had a couple weeks ago. Some good stuff on there. I especially liked how that woman said she likes to walk out on the beach, so I hope you all are wishing you could walk out on the beach and read some books like her lifestyle was. Hey, if you look through your notes, I'm going to just read through what I had, a couple tips, because I want to show you some other things on this website. A few things on their notes about how they lose some of their sense of thirst, and even sometimes their medications might make them even worse and cause them to be dehydrated. So it's certainly important to have plenty of fluids for that reason too. And a little tips between sipping glasses of water, milk, or juice between bites during meal. You even heard some examples from that nice old lady about how she makes herself pretty much have a glass of water right in the morning, so because she knows it's important and it's part of like a medication, part of her day. But we really need to make sure that we're educating the older adults so they are aware of that. That woman sounds nice and educated, but there's a lot of people that certainly aren't as educated as she is. So, just a good example of how water is really important for people. And like I said, this was from the National Institute on Aging, NIH, National Department of Health puts this together. This is one of a government federal agency that sponsors these resources like this. So I want to show you through a couple more examples this website had. If I can get back to the regular one. Actually, if I go to the the home page looks like this. You can, go through this if you want to later, but it's just another example of a resource for someone saying what's on your plate. We've learned about my plate. So now it talks about smart food choices for healthy aging. Looked really easy to use as I went around and looked at it a little bit before. Has shopping tips, food safety, a healthy lifestyle, which including some exercise tips. If I click on important nutrients to know, it's really user friendly. See, kind of goes through protein, carbs, and fats, vitamins and minerals. You guys are all experts on that kind of macronutrients by now, but they're not quite as familiar as you, so you can read through all this. If I clicked on protein, carbs, and fats, it will show you something. It like has little pictures and examples of look simple carbs. You learned about that and how those complex carbs, are a good source of fiber in the complex carbs. So they can read through this. There's our fats. Maybe they can learn them what are the good fats, what are the bad fats. So just a nice resource right there. Okay, and I actually found this resource that I thought was kind of neat. It is inspired from the MyPlate that we've been familiar with, and it's done by the Human Nutrition Research Center on Aging, which is another government-affiliated resource. And I just want to show you because this little picture plays attention to the unique nutritional and physical needs associated with aging. I mean, look at those pictures on the top. There's some examples of how we can incorporate exercise, and even like the socialness is intentionally put in there because older adults tend to live better quality lives if they keep that social interactions in play. They overall can make better nutritional and exercise choices and really decrease depression as well in cases. But really, they have the same nutritional needs as you and I, but their calories intake is less, like I showed you. So they really need to make sure they get more bang for their buck. Remember how I talked about nutritional dense calories? They need to be especially more aware of that kind of thing. So let me just show you how they have, yep, look over here. Here's our like good wheat. Look how it even says like fortified whole grain, oats, that's real wheat. They really look at how they emphasize whole grain right on there. And then our kind of our protein area. Let me say protein, not just meat, because what else isn't protein? We have beans. Look at an example of tofu. That would be a good vegan type option. Peanut butter. And then look at this half the plate. Look, notice how there's no canned vegetables. There's no canned fruit, canned vegetables really because of the amount of salt that are in canned vegetables. We talked about how frozen vegetables have even less sodium. Examples of colorful vegetables. We've learned how those dark green veggies have a lot of our vitamins in it that we need. Examples of fluid intake up here. That's kind of neat because examples like water, tea, coffee, soup really addresses that age-related decline in thirst that put older adults at risk for dehydration. And look at that fork and knife. That's different than, our usual My Plate thing that we look at. They serve as a reminder, and I like this. It says to put down remote controls in smartphones. I don't know how many older adults are using smartphones, but I guess plenty of them. They actually put that in here to put down remote controls in the smartphones and occupy both hands with eating utensils. I think that might be a good strategy for you and I as well. And the focus should be on the enjoyment of food and beverage and on the amount consumed whenever possible. And then including that social interaction as well. Oh, I hope you enjoyed that picture. Oh my. No, I don't want that. So just a little talk on common problems associated with nutrition, just some examples here. Now, arthritic problems such as, and this affects 21% of U.S. population, arthritis, this inflammation of the joints. I put that on there because I know a lot of you might not know what arthritis is. Arthritis, inflammation of various joints. So that can be nutritionally related. A great example of that would be osteoarthritis. Osteoarthritis, one of the biggest factors of that is obesity because we end up putting a lot of weight on our hips and our knees, carrying just more weight around. And then there's more impact and weight stressing our bones and our hips. So our joints will actually start wearing down but weight control can help reduce that nutritional problem. Weight control has an important role in prevention and treatment of that. And another example, and I picked out some common ones, are osteoporosis and fractures. Boy, I've already talked about that already. Look at these stats. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men who reach the age of 90 will fracture their hip. So, exercise and that calcium vitamin D are nutritional, well lifestyle examples of how we can reduce the osteoporosis and the fractures our people are going through. Now, something specific to older adults is the anorexia of aging. And when I say the word anorexia, I don't want you to think of what you're thinking of is probably anorexia nervosa, and that's actually a mental related illness where people are starving themselves. And when I use anorexia, simply in this term, anorexia just means decreased appetite, decreased eating, and it's called anorexia of aging. And so there's some physiological factors that contribute to this, specific to older adults, remember that. We have changes in taste and smell. Our taste buds are not functioning as well as they used to, so foods may not be as appealing taste and smelling, and their appetite may decrease because of that, and they wouldn't be attracted to food and nutrition and not get good food intake. They actually have delayed gastric emptying. Now remember that fabulous video we watched on our digestion and how the food was going from the stomach to the small intestine? Well, that whole experience right there will be slowed. So that will oftentimes make them more uncomfortable, especially I pointed out with fat intake will make them a little more uncomfortable. So delayed gastric emptying can turn someone away from wanting to eat. We know when they just don't feel good. Altered digestion related hormone secretion and hormone responsiveness play a role in it. Just pretty much their digestion is not functioning as you and I, normally. And so there can be a multitude of gastrointestinal related problems that come from that, but just in general, I have that statement in there. Other causes, social. I mentioned how eating together will help, that social interaction will help stimulate better appetite, better nutritional choices. Depression, dementia, or other causes of anorexia of aging. And this is why that healthy people objective was focused on people with decreased cognitive abilities, our dementia people. And dementia is an illness where they often lose their memory, are confused. They get confused on their orientation, who they are, where they are, what the time is, what's going on around them. You can imagine how that can affect them remembering to eat a meal, them understanding their cues of their own hunger. If people are depressed, they tend not to seek good nutritional choices, and that can really impair their nutritional. And another reason for anorexia of aging. And then medication as well. There's a lot of drugs that cause, interactions in their own body where the medication is not letting them feel up to eating, or they don't feel good when they eat, or their medication is causing some you know, other problems where they're maybe not absorbing the nutrients as well. Some medications certainly cause the absorption of nutrients not to be good either. So just some examples of anorexia of aging, which is really important. And you guys just you will get knowing this stuff well because you have to. If you are going into healthcare, I mentioned by the time you guys get out, within 10 years, 20% of our population is this older adult. These are the people that we're caring for, mostly in the hospital. They are the people making up the majority of the population in the hospital. We're seeing them in outpatient clinics, home health care, palliative care, when they're dying and providing comfort. This is our population we need to get really good at knowing. So, some examples of nutritional care for the elderly. You will learn this in nursing. The first stage of the nursing process is assessment. Just knowing that patient. There's many more examples of assessment data other than weight, but I put that stable body weight as a really critical piece of data. When I'm admitting someone into the hospital, we always ask, has there been a recent weight gain or loss, any trouble with that, and if they're there for any nutritional concerns or we're just nutritionally worried about them at all, we'll watch their weight while they're in the hospital as well. And consult our, nutritional people, our registered dietitian would be a great example. So some implementation ideas: using balanced nutritional supplements, liquid breakfast products are becoming effective. The liquid products, the nutritional supplements, they're going to make sure they get good nutrition. The protein's going to be in there, the carbs, the good fats. Some examples you may have heard of, like Ensure, something like that. They come in a little can. Could be a great example to supplement someone that maybe is experiencing anorexia of aging, doesn't have a lot of access to good nutrition. Could be a variety of reasons. That's one example. And I've focused, and I've already said nutrient dense calories, pushing that, making sure they're educated on what is something that's nutritionally dense rather than calorie dense, but then doesn't have the good nutrient. So we call them what? Empty calories. And we say an even unbalanced intake is preferable to no intake at all because, obviously we want something more than nothing. We can hopefully always make that a little better. Something that was interesting, and there's a lot of studies that you could find on how important it is to feed the client, the patient in the hospital when diagnostic tests are completed. Because something crazy that's happening is we get patients in the hospital and they're getting testing or maybe something gastrointestinal related, and we put them on it's called MPO. It's nothing by mouth status, and we don't let them eat or drink. And then, you know how quickly these older adults can go into a cycle where they're not getting protein, and then their whole nutritional system gets kind of messed up. So they need that nutrition once things are done in the hospital. And of course, exercise as appropriate. We've already mentioned that. We've hopefully have learned lots and lots of good information about our older adult today. And one thing I want you guys to do is to email me this. And you don't have to put it in a Word document. You can just open up an email to me and just write these responses in. So I can give you some participation credit for today. Those are those easy points you can do for me. I need you to have this to me by Friday at midnight for participation credit. And I'll let you know that via email as well. So hopefully you'll get that message. But three things I want you to definitely answer for me. Just give me some examples. Why do healthcare professionals need to focus on adequate nutrition for older adults? Give me two examples of that. In your own words, what are two teaching points that we can share with an older adult about their nutrition? Tell me what most interested you about the presentation, because I'm not there to see you and I'd like to know your feedback, what you thought about today, what surprised you, what you thought was interesting. Hopefully something. Although I miss having you in person, hopefully you remember it's still me. And let me know if you have any questions at all. You can let me know via email or just ask me next time we're in class. I will probably email you these questions as well. If you didn't get a chance to jot them down, that will be coming with you in an email. So, some reminders. Watch your calendar so you know that the following Tuesday, when we definitely will be together in class again. When is that? Let's see. I can get my own calendar out. Great. Week 9. We will be already at week 9 by the time I see you next. That'll be Tuesday, October 28th. Make sure you're reading chapter 13. It's about food management, so some interesting stuff in there. And I will have a prep sheet on Moodle when it gets a little closer to that time. Definitely by the weekend before Tuesday. I'll probably have that on by this Friday. Or by the time you're watching this, I'll probably have it on. So just make sure you have your prep sheet done with that. And we won't have a quiz or anything till that next Thursday. Watch your dates for that personal diet analysis. It'd be a great thing for you to have started over midterm break, or since we're not in class, maybe focus a little time on that. Let me know if you have any questions as you review the assignment and what goes into it. I want you to do a good job with this. You guys have been doing great jobs with your assignments, following directions really well. This is going to take a little bit of time because you do have to list your food and fluid intake for 3 days. So everything, good portion, good description. You're going to log that. You're going to compare it to things that we learned, like the dietary guidelines, my plate. I want you to be thorough in your comparisons, in your recommended dietary allowance. And then really reflect for me. If you're looking at the assignment right now, I'm just really just looking through it right now on the personal diet analysis on that third bullet. You're reflecting, and I want you to write at least 4 sentences for each of the following. How your diet related to that. Carbs, fats, proteins, etc. Make sure you're doing everything exactly like that rubric. Go through that excellent column and make sure you are doing excellent work so you can get that good grade on there. Let me know if you have any questions at all. And thanks for your flexibility for joining me today. Have a good one.